in that we try to identify a specialist, so we give them, a full hour to have a conversation with me. And I try to diversify the topics. And given that this is Heritage Month, who better to ask to lead us into a discussion about our proper heritage, leading us all the way to our common shared ancestry. Colleagues, it is my great pleasure to invite Lee to speak to us. I'm sure you've seen the flyer, and as you know, Lee is currently the Philip Tobias Chair in Human Genetics and head of the Center for the Exploration of the Deep Human Journey at the University of the Witwatersrand, and obviously an explorer at large at the National Geographic Society. You can read a little bit about his background, but Lee, you were not born to become an explorer and a paleontologist. Something interesting happened that is part of what you have here, in that you were included, you had been awarded the Boy Scout Medal for Honor for saving a life and the Red Cross Certificate of Merit. This seems to be a turning point in your human journey. Tell us about that.
Hey, you dug a little too deeply into my past. That actually happened when I was a news reporter for a small television station in Savannah, Georgia, and late at night I was covering sort of crime reporting in the middle of the night. It was the worst shift you could get at the news station, and I heard that a woman had fallen in the Savannah River. And having been a Boy Scout and Eagle Scout, she fell in up near a bridge at the top of what we call River Street in Savannah. And I logically said, the river flows out to sea. I'll go down about a mile. I arrived down about a mile from where the police were saying she'd fallen in, and there was no one there. They were all up a mile. I thought, oh no, I've missed the story. And as I was standing there with my camera in hand, I looked out into the river 100 meters out, and there was this flailing body going by, heading out to sea. And so I looked around, and I was it, and I had the choice of filming it or doing something else. And I threw the camera down and jumped in and swam out to her. The Savannah River is a very big river, and ended up about a mile and a half down the river on the banks of the river, holding her. And that was the origin of those two awards that you're mentioning.
Well done, and kudos for you. I mean, you could have got the best picture, but you decided to do something more valuable on a humanitarian line. And then from leaving school, you kind of bummed around a little bit with a few courses, and then something made you change your line of direction. Reading Lucy, The Beginnings of Humankind by Donald Johanson. Tell us a little bit about how that book has shaped your current profession.
So I was supposed to be a lawyer. I came from a small town called Sylvania, Georgia, and there you kind of, if you were a bright kid, you went and you became an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer, or a preacher. And I got into Naval ROTC, Naval Reserve Officer Training, to be a lawyer, going to Vanderbilt University, and hated it. And actually left university after a while because I just didn't connect with that sort of the law in that way. And I was looking for myself. I'd taken these electives in geology and archaeology, and there I began to be exposed to this idea that there was a career there. You could find things. I'd always been fascinated in the past. My father and grandfather were, I think, frustrated geologists. My grandfather was an oil wildcatter. And I was in a library one day and picked up Lucy. And I read it cover to cover there. And there was this one line in there that attracted me. Somewhere in that book, he spoke to the idea that these are the rarest sought after objects on Earth, these fossils of human ancestors. And that it immediately struck me that if you found even a tiny bit of one, you could have a huge impact on this field. you know, at that time in the field, there were more scientists than there were fossils that we analyzed. And so the idea of making a contribution in a field by discovering something, you know, extraordinary and connected with us is actually what dragged me into this field away from what I was going to do, which was dinosaur paleontology.
Yeah, and then of course, by hooking up with Donald Johansen and eventually Richard Leakey, you managed to go to Kubi for fora in Kenya. And
That's
luckily,
right.
first day on the trek, you find a Princan hominid fossil.
That's right.
Tell us about that.
So I arrived with the Harvard University Kubi Field School in Lake Turkana. This is my dream now. I couldn't sleep and got up at 4 in the morning and went down to the sort of central tent area. And there was one of Richard Leakey's hominid gang, John Kimmingitch, who was sitting. He was going to go out on his own that morning. We didn't have anything planned. It was the first day after arrival. And he said, "You want to join me?" And I, you know, of course, oh my gosh, yes. And I spent this remarkable morning as he walked across that landscape, teaching me how to see fossils and discover fossils on that landscape. And towards the sort of late morning, about 11 o'clock, you know, it gets to be just unbelievable temperatures out there in midday. And we were coming back towards the Land Rover. And about 100 meters from the Land Rover, I looked down and there was the shaft of a hominid femur on the ground, and I picked it up, and that was my first day in the fossil fields of Africa.
Yeah, and that is what people in your profession spend their entire livelihoods waiting to find as a field, you know, on field expeditions. But I mean, those are great backgrounds. I'm not sure how many people know that, you know, certain things happen and then you have this kind of lift-off trajectory. Well, colleagues, I just wanted to share with you that my first encounter with a young Lee Berger was in about 1991. I mean, 30 years ago to the day almost. And that was because Lee Berger was doing his PhD with Philip Tobias, and on the direction of Richard Leakey and Johansen, who encouraged him to come to Johannesburg. Lee was in our country. I was doing a PhD with Trevor Jenkins, and Judith Masters had just come back from a postdoc at Yale. And she, you know, she had rubbed shoulders with the great minds in that neck of the woods. And Trevor said to her that she should take us PhD scholars under her wing and acculturate us in the bigger field of evolutionary science in the country. And on that count, Judith invited both Lee and I to her home for tea one afternoon, and we had a lovely conversation in her backyard garden. And then Lee offered to take us to Gladysville, a site that he was working. And I know the date exactly. It was 31st March, 1991. Wow. I know the date because I have a niece who has a birthday that day, and I called her later because I was so excited to go to your site that we had to leave home early to meet you on time. And lo and behold, a couple months after my visit with you at that site, you discovered 2 hominid teeth at Gladysville. And colleagues, it was the first discovery in South Africa spanning a period of 48 years when Lee made this epic discovery. And zoom up to 30 years to the present, Lee has scooped up, you know, prizes from the National Geographic Society, first prize for research and exploration, and the Academy of Achievements Gold Plate Award. He's been a gold medalist of ASAF. And in 2016, the National Geographic Society's Rolex Explorer of the Year. He's a member of many bodies and groups. And so I don't want to steal his thunder. Lee, I now hand over to you to share with us how you have spent your time during this pandemic with the title Discovery in the Time of Pestilence, Lessons for the Future from Exploration During the Pandemic. Over to you, Lee.
Thank you so much, Himla, and I'm going to try and see if I can start this slideshow from the beginning. There we go, and I hope everyone can see that. And you know, it excited me when Himla, you asked me to give this topic, because it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. The idea of how COVID, how the lockdowns, how our loss of travel has been affected our science. And it's been, and I talk with colleagues a lot about this and people that interview me, and that it's actually been, in some ways, while it's been a horrific time for the world, it's also been a very enlightening time for me personally, and in a time where a lot of positive changes have taken place. And I'm going to go through some of those that have taken place and lessons that I've personally learned from this time of pestilence, as we've continued to explore and had one of the most remarkable scientific periods of my entire life. But in order to do that, I want to take you back a little bit into some of the discoveries that we didn't talk about in that introduction. I think everyone who follows this field understands that this is one of the most remarkable, the last 15 years particularly, has been one of the most remarkable periods in this subject area, the exploration of the kind of deep human journey. I think we've probably discovered, I know that we've discovered more fossils and more information about fossils and their diversity across the planet in the last 15 years than probably in the previous 100 years. And a lot of these are still in their infancy, and we're still trying to sort of understand their context within the greater human journey and the understanding of human evolution. And a lot of them are very new. And, you know, sort of my engagement with those has been with a couple of big previous experiments. Of course, the first one occurring, the first major one occurring back in 2008. Emily, you mentioned the Gladysville Teeth that I discovered, which I felt was going to launch my career at that moment. I had visions of, you know, that mandible or that skull appearing, and that 17 years would go by without a major discovery. That first one came with my then 9-year-old son. Here's this picture that I took moments after saying, "Dad, I found a fossil," at a site that would become known as Malapa, and of course have the most fantastic fossils in it that we would eventually name Australopithecus sediba, 2 million-year-old hominid. And being my first major discovery and coming at that particular moment in history and time allowed me to experiment with some things that I had been trying to do. You know, it was an extraordinary moment. Suddenly here I was as a young scientist who'd had kind of a middling career to that point. I'd had, you know, nice discoveries, but nothing like this. And it allowed me to begin exploring the ideas of how was I going to handle this. And I began to explore with ideas of open access, which I'd been passionate about for some years, ever since entering this field and finding it was really kind of an old boys club. It allowed me to look at collaborating with people across the world in a sort of open access way. And it worked fantastically. I mean, we had 3 special editions of Science. I never dreamed of that kind of publications in my life. Hundreds of papers would eventually be published out of that. And it seemed to be a model, a sort of open collaboration that benefited both the university here and others abroad, dealing with the best people in the world. And I was in the midst of that and kind of living the scientific dream. And then Homo naledi came along in 2013. As I started an exploration program again, having ceased that exploration that had resulted in the discovery of sediba for almost 5 years. And that allowed me to sort of take all the lessons and the positives that I'd learned from the sediba exercise and carry it further. I began with, you know, reaching out to the world to find those underground astronauts that would actually do the excavation work and bring together that remarkable group of people. I decided to experiment with going live to the world. We had to invent ways of doing science in an environment that perhaps no other paleoanthropologist had ever worked in these extreme, dangerous environments. We had to adapt daily to that, and doing that all while sharing it with almost eventually 1 million followers across all platforms as we did that, but learning a lot. That incredible collection of what would be a new species of hominid that came out, the largest collection of early hominids ever discovered in the history of paleoanthropology on any continent, allowed my colleagues and I to work with the ideas that we developed in Sediba of collaboration, but take them to a new level. You know, this giant in-person group that we brought out here, we diversified the group and particularly concentrated on early career scientists, because this discovery, I think maybe even because it came after Sediba, allowed us to allow people who maybe never normally would be allowed to work with primary material like this to have the first crack at it. You know, these early career scientists with the best data sets, with these open minds, and that resulted in terrific discoveries. You know, all through this, we began to develop ideas of how do you work with local tech that exists within South Africa. How did we develop it? We worked with things like CT scanners and data sharing and scanning. We got a micro CT scanner at WITS in part off of these discoveries, but also continued the collaborations with international scientists and the very best in the world. Like here you see us working with the synchrotron in Grenoble, France. So working at all levels of technology, taking all these ideas of collaboration, but largely bringing in scientists from all over the world to the very best with their existing data sets to solve these problems that these tremendous fossil discoveries had us do. And that was kind of where we were from a exploration state prior to the pandemic. You know, the exploration we designed, we had explorations in the field. These are conditions we used to work in pre-pandemic. They're cramped, you're working in close proximity to each other. Some of these environments are extremely close contact with low airflow. You actually can't imagine a worse sort of thing that we were invested in what we were doing once the pandemic thing. These are, you know, actual scenes of our explorers underground doing their job, even down to our laboratory activities. You know, we were working in these big open plan laboratories with people all next to each other, working together. That's how we prepared the fossils. That's how we cast the fossils. You know, how could you design a worst operational system? You needed scientists to be flying in all the time to collaborate. You need to be able to travel with your fossils to the best areas. You needed to work in close contact and confined spaces to find them. I mean, I designed the absolute worst situation for an environment that COVID would actually produce. But here it came. And I think we all remember those moments back in sort of February of 2020 and early March, where we suddenly understood that this was going to be life-changing. I mean, I remember that moment where in around February, where I understood that this is going to be a new normal. And I know a lot of us at that time thought that this was going to be just the flu, but I was traveling a lot and I was seeing the disruption that COVID was having around the world. And I think I did have an understanding, and I'm very fortunate in around February, March, that this was going to be a new normal, that change was going to come. And I started immediately, as soon as it became clear that we were going to go into these sort of world-changing lockdown events, to look at what we could do now, and particularly as we entered lockdown, how could we prepare for what was going to be a new normal? And immediately I started thinking, how can we get creative around ideas to problem solve? I think a lot of us were sitting around thinking that, or a lot of people were sitting around thinking that we'll just wait this out, that we're going to get through this. It's going to be a few months or a few weeks or whatever, and then we're going to be right back at it. It became clear that wasn't. And I think some of the things that happening, particularly around the Homo naledi discovery and the extreme conditions, had me with ideas of getting creative very quickly. When we locked down, I think we all took that as sort of a system shock. And I was sitting at home, like all of you were, trying to figure out what could I do from home? What could I do under these conditions where we couldn't move? And of course, one of them was science communication. One of the things that I thought was the world was going to need as we moved into the opening semesters in the global north after summer, they were going to need materials that we were clear we were going to go online. And so I decided in some ways to begin building upon the kind of science communication that I had worked on building with these other discoveries, and approach Wits about the idea of a series of lectures on strategic material that we held here that could no longer be accessed by scientists and students around the world in a way. And so we worked together with the communications office at Wits and developed those ideas of exploring the fossil hominid vault and a series of YouTube videos, which I went and produced there in the lab because I could work in that safe environment, and produced a large number of these with the idea of them being useful for the future of education and teaching that I knew was coming online. A big advantage of that too was it taught me how to work with editing software and how to do all of this filming and audio and stuff on my own, which would prove very useful in the post-COVID thing. But it also proved to be very, very successful. And I think we've had something like 750,000 views of those videos that were produced, and produced something that was useful. I also began taking still images and other stuff and built an Instagram page and Twitter pages and Facebook pages like the Fossil Vault. Again, with the idea of creating resources for a future where scientists were perhaps not being able to access those and students weren't able to access those. So that was one part of it. Began to experiment with communicating with this new digital world that all of us were having to rapidly become familiar with. At the same time, ironically, we'd begun planning to open a museum. Now, we probably ended up as the only team in the world excited about opening a museum instead of closing one during COVID, but getting to plan that and create the content around that during the pandemic was actually of great benefit. We could design all the spaces and exhibits to what would be our new norm, COVID safe environment, not only from a physical sense, but from a psychological sense. So we moved a lot of the contact material away from that and created partitions and sections. So that museum's now open and running. So it gave us the opportunity of creating something like that during the pandemic. But the question was always, how are we going to get back to the field? How are we going to get back to exploration and excavation? And that's something that I was thinking about deeply in the early days of COVID. And so in May of 2020 and then into June, I began proposing ways of getting back out in the field. And I looked at the resources we had. Here's Rising Star site you can see, and you see those little structures in the background. Those were designed for field schools. And I knew that we weren't going to be doing any field schools anytime soon. And so I saw them as an opportunity to disperse our staff, to actually take the operations like the preparation and things like that were going to be done and move them into these remote areas, have lots of fresh airs, and utilize things like those field school huts to turn them into the casting labs and the preparation labs that we could no longer do in these kind of enclosed spaces that I think you guys we were familiar with in the way we worked. And so to that end, I developed first aid courses and protocols for working in the field. We began to stream those live to help other people who were exploring with them and learning as we went in this new world of how can we get people back to work as soon as lockdown levels. Some funny things that we did. We used to transport people in cars to these remote areas. We no longer could do that. So I developed programs like paying people a stipend to actually travel to these areas, which worked enormously well. It actually gave people the resources to travel. It kept them safe and away from each other so we could actually get on with our work. And technology came to our rescue. We put in, because the scientists couldn't be there, because other technicians couldn't give advice, we installed technology. And this is one of those huts you see with the many cameras on the left-hand side that we have to look at almost every angle and communicate live with preparatives so that they could get back to work in a nice, safe environment that only they entered, and we could communicate and work with them from anywhere in the world, in fact, looking through the microscope, looking with them, and that system worked really well. We got, as soon as lockdown levels allowed us to move from the house, our people were back in the field, back doing preparation and in a safe environment. So we were back to work like that. And what was a great outcome of that is actually we've had in this COVID period, in this pandemic period, when a lot of people haven't been able to work in laboratories and stuff, we've had the most productive period of preparation in our entire history. We've in fact prepared more fossils in the last 12 months than we did in the previous 3 years, to give you an idea. And I think part of that is people are loving being able to actually work when so many people can't actually work. But then how do we get back in the field? Well, we couldn't work in sites like Rising Star and Malapa, but we had this site we discovered called the 105 site back in 2014. It ironically was only 200 meters from the Rising Star site where those actual huts are, but it was too difficult. It was a dangerous site to work. We'd found one hominid. We didn't know where it came from. The cave had been overmined. The entrances to the cave were dangerous and looked like they were about to collapse. And we had every reason not to work it. It's why we didn't work it when we first discovered it. But COVID forced me to step back, and my colleagues step back and say, how can we do this? It's sitting here in the proximity of this new facilities that we've actually developed. How can we make it work? And we came up with plans of how we could actually get back into that. And part of that meant solving problems. We put a fire escape in that you see here. So that we could bypass the most dangerous parts of the cave. We began to map the cave using the technology that we have. We did the geology all right up front, live as we were doing that. And we came up with plans on how to actually remove the cave from this dangerous underground environment to the surface so we could actually work on it. Bringing in teams of researchers and stuff who were based here in South Africa, who were available to work on this. And so we got to work at this site. We developed COVID-safe protocols. We developed a concept of moving the underground cave to the surface of the cave. We employed local people, getting them jobs in the height of the pandemic when there were few jobs. So we were benefiting the local community in the area. And we were able to, because the preparation was right there on site, do live preparation that informed us as we were collecting material. All these novel solutions to a problem in a cave that we might never have worked otherwise. It also allowed us to give leadership positions to these particularly early career scientists who were based here in South Africa, trapped like we all were. And they all rose to that leadership because they were involved. Every person on the team was involved in constant problem solving in this new environment in every aspect of the planning. And of course, they rose to those occasions, adapting on the fly as we developed new ways of working in this environment in a way that we never would have done previously. These leadership positions were there readily available. And I emphasize that because perhaps if we decided to work this under different conditions, we might have actually flown in all these experts, kind of like we did for the Homo naledi. But here we were developing a sort of new way of doing this with new opportunities developing and new chances to teach and learn. And of course, the site was spectacular. Almost immediately, we began to recover hominid fossil after hominid fossil artifacts, good fauna, and we were learning about the context and how we could take ex situ material and replace it back into its in situ environment. Beautiful fossils have come out. These aren't the prettiest that have come out. This was just an early one, a mandible that came out. You see the beautiful preservation of the teeth that are coming out. And already, this video on the right was taken just a few weeks ago as we moved the material into a brand new storage hut with new ways of cataloging material from the field that allow us to work on the material in a well-cataloged manner as we get it. It's already, this 105 site has turned into one of the richest hominid sites ever discovered in the history of paleoanthropology. And it's a site we might never have dug if it weren't for COVID, and certainly would have never done it in that way. Another huge benefit that I mentioned briefly is that it's allowed us to engage all these fantastic early career South African scientists in these. Here's Noma as working with Scannium, working and engaging with our overseas collaborators in creating scans and models of material as we discover it, and they're able to study it in real time because they can't come here. Here you see Tebogo and his great work at UJ, and really building an endemic program of geochronology, a world-class, and geology that's happening live on the ground. Canelway, and I'll talk more about that work in a moment, who really rose to a leadership position within that on day-to-day basis in the field, and Paloma, who's working with the archaeology, and all of this, being able to advance the work and really engage as a local team of scientists working on a project wholly, but still able to collaborate because of the technology that we built over the other studies and advanced during this period. And of course, getting local recognition here. One of my favorite things that's come out of this work is the recognition of these early career scientists by not only the regional community within Africa. Here you see these super scientists being presented, just one of several of them. They're being presented in this way, which is exactly the kind of role models we need for young scientists of the future, but also on a global stage. Dr. Canelway Molopane, recognized as an emerging explorer by National Geographic, in no small part due to their involvement in these explorations and expeditions, in the way they were involved and recognized by the world as people watch this science happening live around the world. And learning to communicate in a modern way, learning to do science in a modern way. So I'm going to kind of end off with just some of the sort of major points that I've taken away from this incredible exercise that has occurred. COVID. It's clear that multinational collaboration produces excellent science. We're not moving away from that. That was true with Sediba. It was true with Omonoleti. It's true with these new discoveries. However, with less international travel, COVID has redefined the landscape of collaboration. It's changed the way that collaboration is going to work, and I think probably forever. And I think we need to recognize that we need to build into our system the technology and mindset that allows us to communicate our science and share data and share ideas in a way that is better for the environment. It's lowering all of our carbon footprints. It's also better for creating leadership in Africa and in the developing world with these discoveries in these strategic areas of advantage. I think the current situation offers the opportunity to invest in local talent. Certainly that's been something that has been a direct result in our teams, and something that's going to maybe move that in a much faster direction than it would have occurred normally. It gives these particularly early career scientists, but even middle and later career scientists, the opportunity to explore new horizons as leaders and in front of leading the science, particularly as we develop local capacity to offer support. And what I mean by that is things like the new Center for the Exploration of the Deep Human Journey we've opened in WITS. It offers resources, infrastructure, and facilities in country to a wide variety of researchers who want to be leaders to do field work in that without having to reinvent the wheel every time. I think COVID highlights the need for creative multidisciplinary thinking and problem solving. This is not the same old world that we used to be, and I don't think we're going to go back to that anytime soon. I think it means going after problems and questions we might not normally tackle. The 105 Sabina, we might not normally have gone after that. It was just too hard. COVID forced us to find solutions so we could get back in the field. I think COVID has, and this is really one I want everyone to think about, COVID has probably highlighted the importance to global grant agencies and collaborators to ensure we develop strong scientific capacity in regions that have strategic advantages in certain research areas. What does that mean by that? It means because we were here, because over the last 10 years, 12 years, we've developed these strong domestic-based resources of exploration and science, we could get back to work immediately, and we could be productive and stay at work. And we could do that at pennies on the dollar of the way of normally flying in. And that speaks to the idea of that I think it's demonstrated in the world that the future of science and exploration in the developing world is not in parachute science. For those of you not familiar with that term, that's the idea of largely researchers from the global north parachuting in on their summer vacations, working for a few weeks or months, and then leaving, and all the work stops. What this has demonstrated is that by building infrastructure and capacity, both the human capacity, the infrastructure and technology capacity, we can stay at work no matter what happens in the world. And we can do it efficiently and do it as well as we were pre-pandemic. Here's one that might surprise a lot of you too. I also suspect that there's an opportunity in COVID for funds from agencies that didn't spend their budgets in 2021, 2020 and 2021, particularly where fieldwork is concerned, because a lot of grant agencies around the world fund fieldwork, and then they anticipate funding it on an annual basis. But that fieldwork didn't happen in 2020, and most of it didn't happen in 2021. I think that there's an opportunity, and I would suggest, because I've been doing this and it has been working, going to your grant agencies and saying, we can do the work here. We're here, we're ready to do it. We've got these novel ideas, because I think there might be a lot more money lying around that was unspent during those periods. The future is also bright. What are we going to do next? Well, we're going to push this idea a great deal. You're going to see people like these young scientists here in Africa taking leadership roles. Toboko is going to be opening up a site called the Tufa site and taking the leadership role as principal investigator. Kanelwe is going to be opening up the Gladysville site, and prove that I had no idea what I was doing back in the 90s when I was working that site, and show that our new ideas can make these tremendous discoveries and add to our knowledge. And we're going to be doing a lot more of that, supporting these researchers in projects that might not have ever got off in the way into the future, to create data, to create collaboration and research on this kind of new models and this new world that we're working on. We're building infrastructure. My new center at WITS has built new infrastructure. This is the new small animal research unit built right in the center of the cradle of humankind, built to COVID safe specifications, so we can get into multidisciplinary research, state-of-the-art type of research around animal studies in these critical areas that are right on our doorstep. There are thousands of hectares of pristine wilderness. Why are we using them? This might not have happened in this way if the pandemic had occurred. So just as take-home messages from this, now's the time to undertake high-risk, high-reward science. Look for the great ideas that we can do in strategic areas of advantage while we're in the proximity of them. And of course, what I always say is never stop exploring. I mean, look at that 105 site right on our doorstep, right next to a place where you're spending the last 4 or 5 years, and here was another great discovery. These discoveries are right in front of us. And that's all for now. Just a little sort of look at exploring in the pandemic and some of the positives that I think we can move forward with that are going to transform science in places like South Africa.
Thank you very much, Lee, for that journey into exploration. And I must say, you are living up to a quote that I've found on the internet, where you've said, "No one's ever made a discovery by surging behind a wave. I was always pushing boundaries." And I think your presentation has demonstrated to us that nothing, no matter where it comes from, will stop Lee Berger in his quest for advancing scientific curiosity and putting pieces together to allow the images of our past to come back for us to reflect on our epic human journey. And on the topic of this epic human journey, could you perhaps tell us, given the recent discoveries, what is the kind of new thinking of the evolutionary trajectory leading to our species?
So it's funny. I was about a week. I've been thinking obviously deeply about that. About a week or so ago, I was actually doodling, trying to get just that thought in mind. I was doodling and actually put it out on the internet of this idea of that I and others have had for a long time. This idea of a braided stream and the idea of different ways of thinking about what we're seeing in both your area, the genetic area, the molecular biology, which is just exploding. But at the same time, the fossil record is exploding. You know, you and I knew a very well-known South African scientist, a geneticist, who not less than about 10 or 12 years ago said there's no future in fossils. It's all in molecular biology. It's all in genetics. We have no need for fossils. What we've come to in this remarkable last decade is that we need both. We need extraordinary molecular biology, and it can't function or operate without fossils. Who would have ever thought we would be at a moment where we actually had enough fossils to test these questions? And that record is growing. I mean, you know, when those first teeth were found at Gladysville, they made international news. Two teeth. Now, you know, these are not the rarest sought after objects in the world. We found more hominid fossils in the last 5 years than in the entire previous history of the science. I mean, that's how it's changing. And I think genetic and molecular biology and that period proteomics is equally dramatic in that same time frame and at the same time. So it's been a marriage made in heaven. What it's done though is it's complexified what was a very simple story, an easy to tell story, and made it really hard. So we don't know, you know, when you and I were young researchers in the 90s and moved into the early parts of the 21st century, we had it all figured out. It was out of Africa. Homo sapiens was this thoroughbred, purebred species that we had its DNA marching out of Africa, and it was all very simple. And it was, and even though we talked about bushes and trees, we really taught ladders. and now we can't do that. We know their introgressions. We see this great diversity. We don't even have a good definition for what Homo sapiens is anymore. And that excites me. I think this is probably the most exciting time in history to be a young scientist in this field, because it's so complex. And we know it's complex. And yet we have the tools to answer them. I think it's clear it's going to be messy. I don't think we got the language right yet. I don't even think the braided stream is the idea of this intermixing and traveling through time is the right analogy for this. But we're going to develop that language over the next 10 to 20 years as all these sciences advance, as we get into the field, make more discoveries in archaeology, in the human journey, as we advance the molecular studies parallel there, and geochronology right in there with it. And so I don't have an answer for you on it. I'm still doodling late at night and trying to figure out ways of describing where we are now, but it's not going to be where we are in 5 years.
No, you're absolutely right. And it is very pleasing to see that you also think about these questions. I mean, and just to put into perspective, genetic research works in the direction of studying the present and trying to take it back into the past, whereas the paleontological toolkit is designed for finding specimens from the past and trying to use morphology and other bits of information to reconnect them to the present. And then we have the whole discipline of archaeology, different settlement patterns, you know, the changing dynamics to kind of intersect those positions. And as you mentioned, geochronology, climate change, and all of these other disciplines are pieces of the puzzle that will cumulatively come together. Because at the end of the day, we are tracking one story, one history, and we're coming at it from different disciplines with somewhat different toolkits. And I'm glad that you say that the discoveries are becoming and making the picture a lot more complex. Every time you find a new fossil, it may push the dates of our thinking of that trajectory of the branching patterns if we think in that kind of phylogenetic way. But as you've said to us when I visited you at the cave site 2 years ago, that it is much more complex. There's this mosaic, there's this introgressions, and how do we put it all together? So I agree that we haven't seen the end, but what we are seeing is this fascinating array of questions that we challenge ourselves to ask as more information is coming into the open era. So I think, as you have alluded to, the future of evolutionary science is definitely one that's going to continue to bring us epic stories and journeys. But
if I could just add to that, just a thought that came to my mind. It also think we're also healthfully changing each of our sciences. The next generation, our generation, is looking at a much more open manner. So we are, as a science that tended to just look at the past and then try to bring it in the future, are now spending a great deal of effort examining the present. And trying to say, you as a field that traditionally looked at the present and the past are now spending enormous effort looking at molecules in the deep past and trying to explore those and bring them into the present as we become true sciences, as opposed to sciences fixed within these narrow definitions.
Yeah, Lee, there's a question from Prof Gladysville. And she asked, could you please explain the braided strain concept a bit more?
Sure. And if you go on, by the way, the Fossil Vault Instagram or look on my social media, I published that doodle that I'm referring to. But the idea is that trees and bushes don't reflect the idea of introgressions in the past. The idea that there have been gene exchange even between two different species. When Himmel and I were young and taking genetics and teaching genetics, we taught that, species were genetically apart and they didn't interbreed. And we looked at ways of talking about differences. We now know that you can have a real species, different species, but introgression can there and genes can be exchanged. What we don't understand at this early stage is how important is that? What's being transferred in those changes? What we do know is that has occurred in the past. And so the idea of the braided stream is an idea of looking at, imagine, if you will, in your mind's eye, without that picture in front of you, a glacier at the top of a mountain, and that classic image of a glacial lake at the bottom of it. As the glacier melts, and think of that as the last common ancestor, if you will, between humans and chimpanzees, the last common ancestor of all the hominid species have come maybe 6 or 7 million years ago. Out of that, as that glacier melts, you get rivulets. You get material that comes down that gravel towards that lake. And imagine that lake is the billions of humans alive today. There's, of course, a sort of mainstream to that water as they coalesce and come down, and that's probably that main central story of human evolution. But there are rivulets that go away and meander away, and then parts of them may come back into that main body of water and join it, and then contribute to the later ones. Some of them may go off and disappear in the gravel, and we don't know whether they actually contribute to that lake at the bottom, and some of them disappear entirely, going into the groundwater system. They existed in the past, they were part of the story, but they don't contribute. And so the idea of that kind of braided stream coming back together with some larger bodies of genetic material and influence, and smaller bodies, all coming together to create that entity that is living modern human Homo sapiens. That's kind of an idea of the braided stream idea.
Okay, thanks. Just for some entertainment, Lee, tell us how you got stuck in the cave.
Because I went in somewhere I could get in but not out of. And my ego is such that I don't judge my body size well. We were going into the we had discovered the Lassetti chamber, which is a different chamber from the Rising Star expedition when but also had Homo naledi in it. And I could never get in. I will never get into the Dinaledi chamber. That my head is too big besides anything to get through that crevice. But but I thought I could get into this space. I caved a lot. I've been in very tight spaces, and indeed I could get down. I got down the system. We excavated part of the skull of Neo, that beautiful skeleton, and then going up. And one of the problems was when you're going down foot first, there's an area that you had to crawl under a collapsed rock through an area that's probably about 18 to 20 centimeters high, and I could slide under that. Then you have to bend at 90 degrees through a narrow area and then bend again. Well, that's one thing going downhill with gravity. It's another thing coming up against gravity. And so I ended up stuck in this situation at a 90-degree bend for almost an hour. As then the explorers eventually I took my clothes off, and they tied my wrist together and pulled me up through a narrow gap and out. And if some of you have seen that picture of me immediately after that on the internet, quite happy to be out of that. And little to my knowledge, in a paper that we published, at the last minute, my colleagues snuck in a part of a graphic after the paper had been accepted and named it the Berger box, but much to my chagrin, when I saw it in print.
Yeah. So Lee, you've done a virtual reality insert from this discoveries. Please tell us a little bit about that and where those are now playing.
So you can see that it's actually available for download from the Perot Museum, one of our partners in the United States, where we displayed some of the original fossils. But I've got even better news. National Geographic had funded an augmented virtual reality done at 4K level of the Dinaledi chamber and rising star system. That is actually in the can, and we're waiting. We have a new big discovery that we're working on the finalization, getting ready for publication from the Dinaledi chamber and from the Hill antechamber. And when that goes into publication, we're going to be releasing a 4K augmented virtual reality experience, so you can get in there and have better visibility than an actual explorer getting into that cave and can explore that in 4K resolution. So what we did was a very low K sort of study, which you can still see. Go to the Perot Museum. You can download that and view it on any of the sort of your cell phone optics, but the best is yet to come. We're going to be letting you explore that environment at the highest resolution possible at this time.
Cool. And will that be at one of the museums, or will it?
No, we're gonna open access it. When we publish this next discovery, it'll be part of the data openly accessible for that. So you'll be able to either download it at different resolutions or journey to it online as part of the paper.
Yeah, yeah. Any insights on what's your latest thinking about how those fossils got deep down in the Naledi chamber?
When we first published the Homo naledi, we said that it was a deliberate body disposal, and here we sit almost 6 years later, well, 5 years later at least, and no one has come up with a better alternative to that. We've obviously been working on that, and I will tell you that some of what I'm referring to about new discoveries out of that chamber are relating directly to that. The hypothesis still stands, and I think that that is going to lead us into some sort of remarkable questions to ask in the future about small brain hominids and their complexity and the origin of some of these behaviors. I think that's one of the most exciting parts of that discovery. Besides the fact that we suddenly found this primitive species, or apparently primitive species, and morphologically out of place and out of time, showing us that you can't have these sort of cut off beginnings and ends, firm beginnings and ends to species in the past that we kind of, I think, had conceptualized. But I think the idea that that perhaps we completely misunderstood animal complexity and the complexity of other species in the arrogance of assuming that Homo sapiens invented everything,
Yeah.
is likely well on the way out the window. And one of the beauties of Homo naledi, of course I love it because I was involved in its discovery, but is it's not a Neanderthal. It's not a big-brained hominid that, looks a little bit like us and we can, that's no one, I think, would call that a Homo sapiens, a human. And if we are demonstrating this extreme levels of complexity, human levels of complexity in another species that's clearly not within our morphological realm, I think that's going to have some of the greatest effect on our fields into the future.
Yeah. Would you also like to comment on the future of AI and deep learning in your field?
So I think that's interesting. John Hawkes and I just got a Templeton grant to study AI and its ability to piece fragments together that we previously couldn't. One of the problems we have in this field is that we find lots of disassociated fragments, and you never really know if they go together. We're going to be looking at a way and engaging the world in a way to solve that problem, and then apply that in an open access, the results of that in an open access way to all types of spheres of looking at how do we take fragments and disassociated material and reunite them to build more complete samples. Because one of the problems in our field has been it traditionally is a field of fragments. And what discoveries like Littlefoot, like Sediba, like Homo naledi, like the Hobbit say is you can't actually deal with fragments. You need a lot of these to actually see them. And we're going to work on ways to put that back together. We've got a grant to do that. So that's one way AI is going to do it. Discovery is going to be another way. Obviously, space science and stuff, I've been heavily involved in utilizing space science to find discoveries. I'm working with colleagues around the world on the application of artificial intelligence to discovery, largely using satellite information. But of course, you got to ground truth that stuff. It's one thing to do LiDAR. It's one thing to do space science. It doesn't remove the human from that, because we have to build the information that the AI works from. It can do a little building on its own, but we have that. That's going to be transformational, though, to the field. As we do build those programs, they begin to explore for us in places that we can't get to, in dangerous places, or at scales that the humans can't presently operate.
Yeah. I mean, I can go on and we can go on chattingly, but I mean, I can see my time's coming to an end. Just a final comment from you for the nation on the special occasion that we celebrate in terms of Heritage Month. What message would you like to go out there for the public, for the youth, for the young researchers in totality?
I think it's this idea that there's more to discover. And I think that there's a lot to be depressed about in this world right now, with what's going on politically, with what's going on economically, with what's going on with the pandemic. But we are a species that has been birthed in Africa, with additions from the whole planet. We are a species of born explorers and discoverers. And it's so often easy to be disenfranchised from the idea that great discoveries have been made already, that all the great discoveries were done by previous scientists, that we only make little incremental contributions. And whether you're in any field, not just science, but any field of endeavor, whether it be making humans better, be it peace, be it making better food resources, or being into traditional sciences. What my journey should, and the journey my colleagues have been, should be a lesson, is never stop exploring, because there are discoveries all around us that are often right in front of us. Never stop exploring.
Thanks. I mean, those are epic sound bites, Lee. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, when Marina Jobert from Stellenbosch University did a study on asking the question about who are the best researchers in the country that espouse science engagement and communication, Lee Berger topped that scale by a zillion of points. So, I mean, we enjoy your enthusiasm, your refreshing breath of promise of, good things to come on the horizon. As you say, there's a lot to be depressed about, but there's a lot more to be excited about. Lee, you are the one person that I have the utmost of admiration for, because no matter how your journey goes ups and downs, and there have been a few of those in the past, you have always come back, almost like, with great aplomb and delivered. And I wish you and your team continued success. And remember, you're also part of our ASAP family. And I've asked you this before to get involved in some things, and I know your response, but yes, we do know that you are always there to support us should we have the need to. And congratulations. I mean, the past 3 decades has really brought in a multitude of, not fortune, but good science that you've been able to share with the world. And I know in 1998, when we hosted the dual conference, we were on the same committee working. And then one day you walked into one of the meetings a little bit late with a big smile because you just landed securing funding from Standard Bank for that for that occasion. So you do have a way with intersecting with the business world. I think you have cloned the gene for how you announce a new fossil find by working the media and getting youngsters all the way to, experts around the world involved. Continue with that, my friend. It's been an honor having you as part of my In Conversation series. And we look forward to another opportunity when we can engage, when you have something new to share with the world. Thank you so much, and thank you to the audience for sticking with us. And we will definitely post the recording of this on our website, and share it on our social media, because I'm sure there's a lot more people who would like to share this with you. Thank you, and all the best.
Thank you for having me.